seam is called a mock French seam. You would use this on fabrics that are sheer and where you don't necessarily want to see an overlock on the inside of the garment. So the first thing we're going to do is place our two pieces of fabric together. We're going to have a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and we're going to back tack at the beginning and back tack at the end. So just dropping the presser foot down, stitching 2 to 3 stitches, reversing and continuing down the length of the fabric. Just make sure you stick to the 1.5 seam allowance, and when you're nearly at the end you're going to slow down, back tack, lifting up the presser foot and trimming off the threads. The next step is we're going to actually take off 0.5 of a centimetre. So we're going to take our measuring tape. We're going to make sure that we have 1 centimetre left. And we're going to trim off the excess fabric. So you'll be taking off 0.5 of a centimetre. If you make it any narrower, it's going to be very difficult to do the next step. Just try and stay as straight as you can, making sure that you finish with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, we're now going to head to the iron to press it in place. Now that we're at the ironing board, what we're going to do, we're going to take our measuring tape, and we have a 1 centimetre seam that we've trimmed, and we're now going to turn it 0.6 and press it in place. I'm just going to turn it on its side so you can see what I'm doing. So we've started with a 1 centimetre seam, we've now folded it in 0.6 and we're pressing it in place. Try and make it as flat and as even as possible because this is going to be our stitching edge. Then we're going to do the same to the other side. So you're going to take your tape measure, I'm going to fold it in 0.6 and press it into place. Okay, now we're going to take our fabric and open it up. We're going to roll one on top of the other. And then press them down on top of each other. You want to make sure that underneath has rolled up, and if not, just recatch it with the iron. So let's flip it over and see that they're equal on both sides. If they're out slightly, just widen the seam or narrow the seam and press it into place. So what you should finish up with is 2 seams of the allowance sitting on top of each other with their folded edge parallel to the seam. We're then going to take it to the sewing machine and sew an edge stitch to hold our mock French seam in place. The last part of our seam is now joining our seam allowances together. We're going to edge stitch them. We're going to place it under the presser foot, back tack at the beginning and back tack at the end. Dropping the needle down, reversing 2 to 3 stitches. Now it's only a narrow seam, so we want to make sure that we're catching the top layer and the bottom layer as we go. just keeping an eye that our needle is about 2 mil as it's stitching down that seam allowance. I'm going to reverse 2 to 3 stitches, lifting up the presser foot, and we're going to trim away our threads. Okay, so here's our mock French seam. It's been caught on both sides. We'll flip it over and have a look, and hopefully we've caught both of the seam allowances together. So if we were to open up our sample, we've got a lovely straight line there, and on the reverse, which is the underside of our sample, you're going to have your mock French seam, which will press into place. And that's the end of our mock French seam.